Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. This is me doing my intro to my newsletter for July 27th, 2018. Now, let's see. Keep you up to date. I've actually signed an agreement with For Good Hosting in Vancouver to take over the hosting of my websites. They're also going to do some work to make sure things that aren't working do work. So that's all good news. I've given them access to the DNS so they can make changes. I'm just waiting for Steve to get back to me with the admin login name and password for the server so they can actually transfer the sites over to their hosting service. So I'm hoping that that might all happen by the end of next week, but so far I haven't been able to get hold of Steve to give me that access to the server, so that's a bit of a pain really. So I guess it's just a question of hoping that he'll get in touch quite soon. Okay, so anyway, that's that. I also want to alert anyone that's a member of clans or runs clans, because I do know quite a lot of people that send me new clan newsletters. Maybe you read my newsletter, and in there, just to let you know, there is an article about how to claim some funding to help you host a clan event in Scotland. It says that applications are now open, so I'm giving you details about that, but I thought I'd just alert you to that in this little intro. So without further ado, let me tell you the stories I've chosen for you this week. And I might add, Parliament is now on its summer recess, so I dare say we'll get a lot less news about Brexit and everything. So that will be good news for a wee while. Okay, the first story is Australia, Britain ready to agree a free trade deal. It says Australia and Britain are ready to agree a free trade deal as soon as circumstances allow. Australian Minister for Foreign Affairs Julie Bishop said on Friday. So that's good. And I do know, by the way, that New Zealand and I believe Canada are also very keen to do trade deals as well. There's a lot of talk in the press about the best deal for Britain would be to get a Canada plus they call it deal. In other words, get the same deal as Canada and we'll be fine. That way we'll have left the EU, we'll have left the common market, we'll no longer be under the European Court of Justice. So a Canada deal on its own I think would be great, but if we can get a plus then even better. But frankly, I think the way Theresa May's going is just, I'm sorry to say, it's pretty pathetic really. I mean, if you really take time to study all of the terms and everything that have been put out there, May's deal would restrict the free trade deals we can negotiate with the rest of the world. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And to me, that's the major reason for leaving, is to get free trade deals with the world. And I don't understand why people don't see that, and clearly they don't. So it's a real puzzle to my mind why people think we'd be better in the EU or not to leave. It just makes no sense to me whatsoever, other than if you're defeatist and you're convinced Britain's going down to the dogs, which it certainly isn't. If you look at all the figures that have come out since we did that referendum, Britain's doing stunningly well. Anyway, so for the next story I picked was From Balti to Buna, the ultimate guide to curry. Well, as Scots all over the world love curries, I thought I would bring you that guide from the BBC. Because if you've never tried a curry, you really should, and that explains how you can get very hot and very mild ones. Okay, big story is Tory member support for May's Brexit plan falls. 2 in 3 are now opposed to it. In short, the Prime Minister's backing has actually gone backwards since she stepped up her efforts to sell her new position. And to be honest, it bodes very badly for the next election. I'm pretty sure the Tories will just lose tons of seats. But unfortunately, stupid Mrs. May, Prime Minister May, has no bloody idea about how to run the country. I mean, it showed at the last election she was the most pathetic leader that we've ever had running an election. I mean, a 20% lead went to an actual decline. It was just pathetic. I mean, I couldn't understand how she could have got it so wrong. And she's continuing to get it so wrong. She'll go down as the worst Prime Minister in all of our political history, for sure, in Britain. Anyway. Busting the Remain-inspired myths about trade on WTO terms. The reason I'm bringing that story is because of the stupid white paper that Prime Minister May's put out is now more likely that we'll just leave the EU and it will then be on WTO terms. So you need to read this article so you're prepared for that eventuality. And then the next story I picked was Growth Commission response. In a major new paper, These Islands offers a detailed response to the SNP's Sustainable Growth Commission report. And in this newsletter, I have given you a link to this, but I've also given you a link to the actual growth paper itself, which is 354 pages, I have to say. But if you want to take the time to study it, and then study the response, then I think you'll get a very clear picture. But frankly, I don't see many people going to the bother of reading both of these reports. But I certainly think you should read the much shorter response. At least that would give you an idea of what's going on behind the scenes. Next story is the SNP's economic case for independence is incoherent. So why won't anyone say so? This is another from the New Statesman. So then, don't know, don't care. The crisis of confidence in British politics, which is an absolute disaster right now. Britain and EU formally start splitting WTO membership agreements. Britain and the European Union formally filed for divorce at the World Trade Organization on Tuesday, following many months of diplomatic preparations to smooth the way for the historic move. Then UKIP is back thanks to the Chequers backlash. Theresa May's approach to Brexit is providing the ideal conditions for the party's revival. And then that one I told you about, the Scottish Clan Event Fund, now open for applications. And that's it as far as the news goes for news stories for this week. Okay, on to Electric Canadian. Added another issue of the Engineering Journal. This is for 1948. And another one for Canada and its provinces. This is volume 8. It's the Dominion Political Evolution Part 3. And then another copy of the Mining Journal, this time for 1895. And I will say they've changed the format somewhat on that, and you've got a much better table of contents. So you might want to look at the table of contents and see if there's anything in there that's of interest for you. Then I have a report of the Committee of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. It's for promoting the religious interest of Scottish Presbyterians in the British colonies. It was done on the 23rd of May 1839. and deliverance of the Assembly with appendix containing correspondence with the Colonial Office and other documents. So it's not just Canada, that one, it's all the British colonies. And then another book I've got for you is Views of Canada and the Colonists. It's embracing the experience of a residence, views of the present state of progress and prospects of the colony, with detailed and practical information for intending emigrants by a 4-year resident. This was done in 1844. And then a nice wee story, 3 boys in the wild North Land. The boys are from Scotland, England and Ireland, and it's a really good and enjoyable read, quite light-hearted. It's written for the young ones, but frankly us old ones enjoy these as well, so I hope you enjoy how we read it, that one. And there's a couple of stories from Conrad Black, who actually said he was finished for the summer, but clearly not. The West is a mess, but Europe is where the real troubles are. It's his first article. And second one, a ghastly and tasteless escalation of tensions with ourselves. Then on to Electric Scotland. We're continuing with the Commonwealth of Australia with the penultimate volume. This is volume 18 from July 1835 to June 1837. So if you've been following along, we're almost there. And then I have a Domestic Medicine, a treatise on the prevention and cure of diseases by Regiment and Simple Medicines by William Buchan, MD. This went through a whole pile of reissues. This is I'm not quite sure which one this is, but it's certainly been brought up to date. Bearing in mind it's 1839, but it's great to see the way medicine's progressed since that date. And so really, and of course reading through it, there's a lot of people who like old remedies. Maybe the parents or grandparents wrote them down sometime. It's a bit like if I ever got a really bad cold, I would take a kind of aspirin with lemon, a hot drink basically with aspirin and lemon, and basically a drink of whiskey to go with it, and that seemed to cure my colds. So maybe a little bit of sugar to sweeten the kind of lemon is okay. Next one I've got for you is Ebenezer Henderson. He was a minister and missionary to Russia, Denmark and Iceland. And I added a couple of the books that he wrote. I've added this person to our Significant Scots section, but also added links to a memoir of him and a book about his year in Iceland, where modern DNA tells us 65% of Icelandic women can trace their roots in Scotland. So on that basis, Iceland's a very Scottish place, so it's kind of interesting that. Yes, Sustainable Growth Commission added this report to our Economy and Taxation section under Scottish Independence, which is some 354 pages. Under that, we've added a link to a report in response to it. You can get these links at the foot of the page where I give you the link to it. So that gives you the response and the actual report itself. And I tell you, if you really want independence in Scotland, I really think you need to read both these papers and take time and study them. Because if you're making a kind of decision on the basis of your heart rather than the head, I really think you need to get some facts. Now you can dispute any facts you want, but I think you need to start to try to get to the truth. Because if your heart says Scotland should be an independent country, and we become an independent country, and then it's a disaster, you're going to, you are to blame then. You're part of the problem, that you've caused a lot of Scottish people to be very poor and very unhappy, and it's your decision that's going to do that. So I think at least you need to be appraised of the facts and make up your mind whether these facts are real or not. But if you don't read it, I don't see how you can possibly vote for independence, because it would be incompatible. So you really need to read this and stop messing around. Okay, the next story I've got for you is the Phoenicians' origin of Britons, Scots and Anglo-Saxons. It's a book printed in 1924. So an interesting case here, which is definitely worth a read. And then I've gone on with the Middle East. Technically Egypt's not in the Middle East, but clearly it has an effect on the Middle East of quite some disproportionate matters. So I've popped in a couple of books, which is Egypt and the Egyptian Question, and Egypt and the English. So I think if you read that, you get a good understanding of Egypt. And one of the books was published in 1888, the other in 1908. And then, because I've keep working on the Middle East, I've got Iraq, an illustrated history and guide. And that in particular I thought was truly excellent. And it was produced in 2004. So, you know, after the Gulf War basically, and I think it's a really good read. And if you want to try and understand Iraq, I think it's important to read that. And then I've continued a little bit of work on the ground crews. So I've got Flight and Aircraft Engineer. This was the first Aero Weekly in the world, and this is the May 8th, 1919 edition, so just after the First World War. So I picked this one, but there's a ton more in the Internet Archive if you enjoy reading it. I'm not going to do more, I just thought I'd do that one. Then the rigging, maintenance and inspection of aircraft. There's the A license that they're talking about here, and what it all involves. So again, this is your ground crew and what they needed to do to obviously inspect aircraft when they came back from war. Then I've got another one, the works of the Duke of Argyll. This contains three of his works. One is The Reign of Law, next The Unity of Nature, and the final one is Primeval Man. And he was certainly quite a character, and everything he wrote was well researched, so well worth a read, any of these. Then I've given you a huge 8-volume tome to read. It's the Naval History of Great Britain. It's including the history and lives of the British admirals. It's by Dr. John Campbell, with the continuation to the close of the year 1812. It's comprising biographical sketches of the admirals, which were omitted by Dr. Campbell, and likewise of naval captains and other officers who have distinguished themselves in their country's cause in 8 volumes. So I've given you a link to those. You'll find the top is a 6-volume history, and then below that I've put this new Naval History of Great Britain in 8 volumes. And then finally I decided it was time to put something up on the Falklands War into a Scottish Regiment sequence. So it's a compilation of videos and research on the war. By necessity, some of them are from America. The books are more or less judging on how good we were and how we won and how we might not have won and what worked well and what didn't work well. The one thing I hadn't seen a mention of, and if I read in more detail, I remember the ships burning. Remember, they were made of aluminium because it was cheaper and lighter. But when aluminium gets on fire, you just can't put it out, and that's why these naval ships were destroyed. If they made of steel, that wouldn't have happened. They would have survived. So I think that was one of the big lessons. But other lessons had to be learned as well. And I think the US learned quite a lot actually from it, as did Russia for that matter. Because after all, this was the first kind of naval war that had been fought since World War II, so, and with many of the new weapons around, kind of interesting. Then, the story this week, it's actually 2 parts. I decided to bring you part 1 this week and I'll do part 2 next week. It's the Scottish Highlander. This is a critical look at the Scottish Highlander from a Scot in Canada, where some 15% of the population claims Scottish descent. There are more folk of Scottish descent in Canada than there are in Scotland, and in some respects they are more true to Scottishness than the Scots that remain in Scotland. So this is by a B.J.L. Morrison, who's Professor of History at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. So I find it very interesting, and it takes up about half the newsletter because it's quite a big story, so hope you enjoy reading that. And basically that's it for this week. So hopefully by next week we'll be up and running on the new servers. I say I've just got to get Steve to give me the password and log in for the server, and then we'll get everything transferred and up and running. So sorry about the community. It's partly up. You can put it in a message, but I find if you put a link in the message, then the message just simply won't display. So there's clearly an issue there. So hopefully we'll get that fixed when we transfer over. Okay, well anyway, I hope you have a good weekend when it comes, and look forward to any comments that you may have. And as always, I'll put a link to the actual PDF newsletter underneath this video. Thanks for listening.